Hello, BookTube. It's Tuesday, as I mentioned, and that is Tag Tuesday here on BookTube. And there are a few tags going around that I'm really enjoying, so I thought I'd do both of them. Two of them today. There are a couple more that I want to do, but they take a little more preparation. I did one already today that is impossible, the 5 best English novels tag. But there's also one by Pax Panic, who has a great channel called The Panic Tag. I'll leave a link to the original down below, and it's a question about phobias. So I thought we'd do some of those. I've got some reading that I want to do to you from some of my picks. The first one, of course, is Arachnophobia. And there's a gloss on it called Fear of Spiders, and that goes throughout this tag. I want to stress that a phobia is not a fear of something. It's an irrational, uncontrollable fear of something. It's perfectly okay to be afraid of spiders because spiders can often be dangerous. It's a question of, are you irrationally so? When you see a tiny little house spider, do you lock up? And the same thing with all the rest of these, although some of them are purely irrational on the face of it. Arachnophobia, fear of spiders, name a book with a ton of characters. And the second tag is colorophobia, which is fear of clowns. Name a book with a ridiculous or funny scene. And I want to choose the same book for both of those. It's this thing, I've praised all of these books on this channel before. This is Robert Massey's book, Dreadnought. Huge thing about the Edwardian era, the end of the Edwardian era, the end of the Victorian era, and the build-up to World War I. And Massey does a great job at maintaining that narrative tension all throughout, increasing it all throughout. There's my guy right there, and also his cousin. But for me, one of the highlights of this book is the same as one of the highlights of Barbara Tuchman's book on the same subject, The Proud Tower. And that is the gallery of personalities that we get, the great moments. Massey's done a huge amount of research for this book, and he doesn't forget to include those moments. And one of them that I just love, I've read it on this channel before, but I think it's been years, so I thought I'd read it again. One of them is, of all things, the funny side of Queen Victoria. I thought I would read you that little bit. With the passage of time, the Queen's sense of humor, suppressed first by the rigid decorum imposed by Prince Albert, and then by the burden of grief imposed by Albert's death, resurfaced. Though Albert was never forgotten, and every day the Queen was at Windsor, she visited the Frogmore Mausoleum, she did begin to smile, then to laugh, then to roar with laughter over pomposity undone, pretense revealed, or language ludicrously misused. At dinner one night at Osborne House, the Queen entertained a famous admiral whose hearing was impaired. Politely, Victoria had asked about his fleet and its activities. Then, shifting the subject, she asked about the admiral's sister, an elderly dowager of awesome dignity. The admiral thought she was inquiring about his flagship, which was in need of overhaul. Well, ma'am, he said, as soon as I get back, I'm going to have her hauled out, roll her on her side, and have the barnacles scraped off her bottom. Victoria stared at him for a second, and then, for minutes afterward, the dining room shook with her unstoppable peals of laughter. So this book is both. It has a huge cast of characters, including quite a few 19th century German financiers that you would not think anyone could make interesting. And yet they're all fascinating in Massey's hands. So that's the first two. Then the next one, prop number 3, is Archiphobia, a fear of heights. And the question is, name a book that changed your view. And technically speaking, every book should do that, at least a little. But I have one in mind that came up just recently. It came to my mind when David Murphy was visiting, and I realized that I don't have a copy. I got an advance copy from the publisher. I got the finished copy from the publisher and reviewed it. And in a rare instance for a nonfiction work, I also got the paperback from the publisher, and they're all gone. I'll find the ebook somewhere, or I'll find the book, the paperback book itself, or the hardcover. But the book was tremendous, and I would say that it changed my view. Certainly, it's bursting with ideas. It's that kind of a history work. It's not so much, here's the latest recounting of the Battle of Little Bighorn. Instead, it's conceptual, very much conceptual. It's by Philippe Sands, and it's called East-West Street. And it's about the two people who invented both the term genocide and the term crimes against humanity. And it turns out that their life stories intertwine in fascinating ways, and that their method of historical thinking largely comes from the same sources and maybe even the same building. It's a remarkable feat of historical investigation, but it's also really, really thought-provoking. I cannot strongly enough recommend it. Uh, then the next prompt is Tripophobia, which is a fear of holes. And again, I want to stress, holes, not so much feared, but your brain will automatically buzz with caution about a hole. Holes are inherently dangerous. You wouldn't want to be without a certain amount, maybe not fear, but caution of these things. There are some people, though, who are irrationally afraid of holes. They won't go anywhere near them. They can't stand to see them, even on film. And the prompt here is name a book with a plot hole. And I have another example here. This is a famous one. This is by Charles MacDonald. This is A Time for Trumpets. This is his great, great book about the Battle of the Bulge. And the plot hole here is the Battle of the Bulge. If you were to look at the plot of World War II as a novel, you would never in a million years, is there a map? You would never in a million years understand what was going on here. It would never make any sense to you at all. I don't know off the top of my head if I can find a map. Yeah, okay. The German idea was to push through to the nearest river. To push so you've got battalions of Allied encampments. The Allies are certainly going to win the war on the European continent. They outnumber the Germans. They have a ton more equipment, and most vitally of all, a massive amount of gasoline, whereas the Germans have none. The Nazis are beaten on the Western Front, and they know it. But because they have a madman as a leader, he decides on a last-ditch attempt not only to reach the nearest river and breach the Allied lines, but maybe to turn the tide of the war. It's totally insane. It counts as a plot hole. Not so much why Hitler would think of it, because, like I said, he was nuts, but why anybody would agree to do it. Anyone who had even the most rudimentary idea of how to read a map would know that it was doomed to failure and might make things much harder for the Germans. And yet, everyone went along with it. And for a few seconds, for a night, it seemed to succeed. It caught a lot of those Allied encampments by surprise. They could read a map too. It never occurred to them that the Germans would mount an offensive that was certainly doomed no matter what. So they were caught with their guard down. Some of the easternmost divisions of those Allied encampments were caught so much with their guard down, the German troops were walking in amongst them before they realized what was going on. And it was pretty bad for a few days. But it was never going to succeed. It never had a chance of succeeding. And David and I, this again came up in David Murphy's visit here to Boston. So we were talking about this and Peter Caddick-Adams' book, Snow and Steel, which is also about the Battle of the Bulge. So I guess that's stuck in my mind. It's stuck in my mind. A lot of the books that came up during that visit have stuck in my mind. I think I need to reread A Time of Trumpets, so that stuck in my mind anyway. And then when I was looking at this tag, I realized that is baffling. It's even, to my mind, it's even more baffling than Hitler's decision to invade Russia. Because although he had every historical antecedent in the world to know that you don't invade Russia, especially if you've only a few months until winter, you don't do it, you won't succeed. But also, aside from those historical antecedents, Hitler had a lot of reason to think that maybe his troops could do the impossible. That wasn't the same thing. That was odd and ill-advised, and if anyone had been able to give him advice, he wouldn't have done that. But the Battle of the Bulge was just insane. I think it counts as a plot hole. Then next up we have Mysophobia, which is a fear of germs. And the prompt here is to name a book with the best symptoms/infection. And I thought of one that I don't actually have, which is The Coming Plague, which is a big fat book that came out as a hardcover that just totally absorbed me when I first read it. Then it came out as a big Penguin trade paperback. One of those orange spine Penguin trade paperbacks, and I must have read that paperback. I had a paperback copy of that forever. I must have read it 3 or 4 times. It's all about new diseases in the world, but it's old. It's like 35 years old, so they're not new diseases anymore. But the main point of the book is not so much those specific diseases as how they get loose and what they do. What they do is very important because that we're going to face that pattern as humans penetrate into every last corner of the world, and also as huge areas of the world that have been under permafrost for millennia are suddenly bared to the outside world. We're going to be dealing with this, and that element of The Coming Plague is horrifying. just horrifying. You see over and over again the behavior of viruses are described in such a way that you can almost start to think of them as predatory animals. Viruses, of course, are not animals. There's a vociferous debate as to whether or not they're even alive. But they do behave in very similar ways. They have a kind of refugia of their own where they stick in an enclave, and if that enclave is breached and they get out into a broader population, they tend to behave in similar ways. They are at first ferociously violent. So survival rates very low in humans that contract them, maybe eating other animals too before humans get them. And then that vitiates because a virus, more than anything, wants to survive, and it needs a living host to do that. So a virus with a 95% fatality rate is a bad virus. It's a virus that's being too much, too much, and it needs to cool its jets a little. I wish that I had a copy of The Coming Plague because it could not help but feel more relevant today. So it's not one single set of symptoms and infections. It's just a book that is really a bible of modern pandemics. The next prompt is Astrophobia, fear of lightning/thunder. Name a book that hit you hard. And it's irreverent, but I immediately thought of an answer to this. I was once one time futzing around with a history bookshelf that went from floor to ceiling. I was futzing around at the bottom shelf because at the time I had beagles that chewed things. And I was trying to figure out, I don't, if they feel like chewing things, they can go right ahead and do it. So I was trying to figure out a way to save things on the bottom shelf, or maybe even not to use the bottom shelf. And I was fiddling around with it, taking books off, and I was unaware, I wasn't noticing that I was wobbling the thing just a little, and I was slowly dancing a book way up top to the edge of the shelf, and finally it fell. It was a box set of trade paperbacks of Fernand Brauddel's The Mediterranean. That box set of trade paperbacks that used to be available everywhere in America, the box set hit me in the head. So that I would say that is an example of a book that hit me hard. And then finally, Enochlophobia, a fear of crowds. Read a fascinating story that somebody just re-upped on social media about from, I forget the original journal, but it was a study of how crowds behave like large turbulent bodies of water. They stop behaving like groups of humans at all. It's extra terrifying. I read a study of that done by, I think the Department of Defense. They put it for free in their archives. You could write away for it on how crowds behave, on the mechanics of almost the hydraulic mechanics of how crowds behave, why they do what they do, and how predictable it was. Now, in the context of that report, it was the DoD wanting to know those things in order to control a crowd, or even instigate some of this dangerous behavior if it's the crowd you want to kill its inhabitants. But it's become all the more important. I mean, every time there's some sort of crowd-related catastrophe, a sudden flash fire at a nightclub, a sudden panic at an outdoor venue, when things like that happen, crowds start to behave, and they don't behave like an agglomeration of people. They behave like a physical property on their own. So fear of crowds, again, I want to say, an irrational fear of crowds, okay, is a phobia. But a fear of crowds is not at all a phobia, not at all. Plenty more, usually in catastrophes like that, far more people lose their lives from the behavior of the crowd than from the inciting incident. But the prompt here is name a book with a place/group of people that you hated. And naturally, my first response was to pick one of these Trump apology tour books that are coming out in a regular fusillade every single week in this publishing season and in the last few publishing seasons. Kellyanne Conway has a book, for God's sake. Kellyanne Conway. I don't know what she thinks her legacy is going to be. I honestly don't know how she looks herself in the mirror every morning. But she is an absolute byword for someone who literally never told the truth in public, who twisted the truth and smiled at it with pride at how good a job she had done. That's what got her, it caused networks, cable news shows to stop inviting her on because they weren't going to get anywhere and she was going to be smirking the whole time. Obvious lies. So I was tempted to go with the Trump rehabilitation team and all of those noxious, horrible books. But then I went to, I thought that might be a little tiresome because I go to that well all the time. So I went to The previous batch. I went to the earlier iteration, a time that I lived through and started to write about, that I thought was the worst disgrace any U.S. presidency could ever field on the public. I was wrong. It was Richard Nixon. It was the lead up to Watergate and the aftermath, as the more we learned about what happened in Watergate and how seedy it was. And I thought, okay, well, this is horrible. This is absolutely horrible. A drunk and a racist, using the levers of his elected ability to go after his enemies and warp the electoral process. It never occurred to me in a million years that a president would come along who would organize, orchestrate, lead, and then spearhead an armed insurrection to overthrow the United States government and have himself installed as an unelected dictator. That never occurred to me in a million years. I have to say, I never thought I'd say anything good about Richard Nixon, but it never occurred to him either. No president ever thought that before, that maybe I am okay with the crowd executing my sitting vice president. If it'll keep me in power another day, even, then maybe I'm okay with police losing their lives at the Capitol and whatnot, people smearing excrement on the walls of the Capitol building. So I had no idea what was coming. To me, that seemed the worst, but it did spark a whole bunch of great writing. And one of the great books about that group that I hated was The Friends of Richard Nixon by George Higgins. The title is a play on the title of Higgins' most famous book, The Friends of Eddie Coyle. And this is a nonfiction work. This is a work about Watergate and the people who are in it. And the quote that I want to give you, I've quoted this before on my channel, but it's been a while. I won't block the bean because she's being extra adorable. She's being extra adorable. This is Higgins writing about slowly coming to light that Nixon was trying to obstruct justice, and that all of his Confederates knew it. And this is the quote that I love. I've read it before on this channel, but I love it a lot. So Higgins is referring to people in the criminal division of the United States Department of Justice and whatnot. He says, none of them suspected Mr. Nixon was of obstructing justice. Consequently, they did not suspect his lawyer, Mr. Dean. They were, as a matter of fact, plenty of people who said or strongly implied that the president was doing exactly that. And he was. But the people who said it could not prove it, and the people who could have proven it were busy helping him do it. That is just awesome. That is just awesome. Well, let's do that again. There were, as a matter of fact, plenty of people who said or strongly implied that the president was doing exactly that, obstructing justice. And he was. But the people who said it could not prove it. And the people who could have proven it were busy helping him do it. So I had to quote that again. I love this book. I wish it were still in print, but it would be ancient history now to Americans. And I don't even want to think about how many Americans polled today, how many Republicans polled today would say that Nixon was innocent, that it was fake news, whatever, a witch hunt. I don't even want to think about that. But anyway, we'll end on that note. That was the Panic tag, just terrific tag. Once again, as with the top 5 English novels, I will try to remember to leave a list of a bunch of people who have done this because the tags are worth your time. But in the meantime, I need to wake up a certain little sleeping princess and take her for a stroll around the block, I think. Don't you? Doesn't she looks so peaceful, but probably she could do with waking up, stretching, and then going for a walk. we shall see. We've had some wonderful, wonderful walks today, including one in which we rounded a corner and saw a young couple walking was obviously their new puppy. Just a floppy, big, elbowy, gooey puppy who just oozed with affection and enthusiasm for everything she was seeing. And unfortunately, she did that to Frida. Frida just froze on the sidewalk like that. And the couple were curious. They were cautious but curious. They very much obviously wanted to socialize their dog well. And I agree with that. And I also want that to happen. And I have to issue usual reassurances to people like that Frida is not hostile. She will not attack your dog, no matter how much it looks like she will, no matter how much she might be screaming or huffing. She will not do. She's not aggressive. She's just, and she's also not unfriendly. She's perfectly happy to make friends, provided they're humans. She has no interest in making friends of dogs. None at all. The most she will do, if your resume is really good, is make you her servant if you're a dog, but she won't make you your friend. She has no interest in dogs as friends. And so we brought them together And the whole time I knew it was going to happen. I knew that baby girl was going to start to bounce and jump around and try to play with Frida. Because that baby girl was receiving a very strong welcome slash play invitation. And naturally, she thought it was coming from Frida. Her human owners don't even know how to see that, much less how to do it themselves. And so and she doesn't remember her litter mates. So the only time she's ever encountered has been in the play dates they take her to. And she was right. She was getting that invitation, but it wasn't from Frida. It was from me. She doesn't get that. Frida doesn't do that. She doesn't want to play with other dogs. She doesn't really like them. And this dog started bouncing up and down, which caused Frida. She has a thing that she does where she buzzes like a beehive. It's not really growling. It sounds more like buzzing. And then the baby girl wasn't getting the response that she wanted, and she still hadn't figured out that she should be doing this to me. So she started swatting, just play swatting. And Frida was just standing there as these swats were hitting her head. It was making her more and more outraged. So finally I had to squat down and just say, baby girl, just don't do it. You're not going to get any response at all. Here, come to me. Come swat me. Cover my face in kisses, smooch all over me. And we did that, and then all was fine. And then, her owners were really nice, and as they were walking away, I think the next 20 minutes consisted of Frida walking stiffly next to me, basically asking over and over again, what the hell was wrong with that dog? Because my little baby doesn't understand those kinds of things. I do, you little girl. You don't understand those kinds of things. It's all right. You don't have to. But anyway, that was a tag and then a dog anecdote. But I'll wrap this up for now. It was a fun Tuesday, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.